The Arctic, a frozen graveyard of lost secrets. Beneath its endless sheets of ice, time stands still, but some things refuse to be forgotten. In 2018, a military satellite picked up something buried deep in the ice, something that shouldn't have been there. A WWII submarine, missing since 1943. But when the research team uncovered its remains, what they found inside wasn't just a relic of war. It was something far more terrifying. Because this submarine was never truly abandoned. The Arctic had always been a place of lost things, a frozen graveyard of forgotten relics and vanished history. Beneath its endless sheets of ice, wreckage from wars, doomed expeditions, and lost civilizations lay preserved in the cold, untouched by time. But among these countless mysteries, one stood apart. In 1943, at the height of World War II, the German submarine U-977 embarked on a top-secret mission in the Arctic Circle. Its orders were classified, its crew sworn to secrecy. Then, without warning, it vanished. No distress signals, no wreckage, no signs of attack. It was as if the sea had swallowed it whole. For decades, conspiracy theories swirled. Some believed it had been caught in a freak ice storm and crushed under the relentless pressure of the frozen sea. Others whispered that it had stumbled upon something it was never meant to find, something that ensured it would never return. But without evidence, U-977 became just another unsolved wartime mystery, lost to the abyss of history. Until 2018, a military satellite sweeping over the Arctic picked up an unusual metallic anomaly buried deep beneath the ice. At first, analysts dismissed it as a natural formation or an old piece of Cold War debris. But as the scans were analyzed further, the contours of the object became unmistakable. It was a submarine. And not just any submarine. It matched the exact dimensions of U-977. The discovery sent ripples through the scientific and military communities. If the scans were correct, this wasn't just a wreck. It was a perfectly preserved time capsule, frozen in place for over 75 years. The implications were staggering. What had happened to the crew? What had forced the sub to remain trapped in ice? And most disturbing of all, why were there signs of movement in the area? The call to the ice. Dr. William Carter had spent over 3 decades uncovering the secrets of the deep. At 55 years old, he was one of the world's leading marine archaeologists, having worked on everything from sunken Viking ships to Cold War submarines lost in the Atlantic. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this. The moment he saw the satellite scans, a chill ran down his spine, and not because of the Arctic cold. There was something wrong about the image. His first instinct was to check for data corruption. Military satellites often picked up environmental distortions caused by shifting ice formations, but the readings were too precise, too distinct. The submarine was there, locked beneath nearly 60 meters of solid ice. That wasn't what disturbed him. It was the surrounding area. Faint but unmistakable, the satellite had detected tracks in the snow. The problem? This section of the Arctic was completely uninhabited. No research stations, no recent expeditions, nothing. The ice in this region had remained untouched for decades, and yet, the satellite had picked up patterns. Something had moved near the wreck. Carter zoomed in on the infrared data, his breath caught in his throat. The tracks weren't random. They followed a pattern, looping, pacing, almost as if something was patrolling the site. But what could survive in such an inhospitable wasteland? Polar bears? Possible, but unlikely at this latitude. Military activity? There were no records of recent operations in the area. A natural phenomenon? Unlikely. The precision of the movements suggested intelligence. And then, there was the biggest question of all. Why now? If the submarine had been frozen for over 7 decades, why were these tracks only appearing now? Something didn't add up. Carter leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he considered his options. He had been personally requested to lead the mission. The National Science Foundation had fast-tracked the funding request, and the U.S. Navy had already approved limited logistical support. The opportunity was too great to pass up. A German WWII submarine lost for over 75 years, perfectly preserved under the Arctic ice, and something watching over it. He exhaled slowly. This was no ordinary expedition. This was a recovery mission into the unknown. Arrival in the Frozen Wasteland. By early March 2018, Carter and his team landed at an isolated Arctic outpost, the closest accessible base before heading deeper into the ice fields. The team was small but highly specialized, experts in glaciology, marine archaeology, and military history. Alongside them was Dr. Helena Brooks, a biologist specializing in Arctic wildlife, brought in due to the strange movement patterns seen on the satellite scans. As the convoy of heavy-duty snow vehicles began their 4-day journey across the ice, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into something far bigger than a simple wreck recovery. The first sign came on the second night. The team had set up camp to rest before the final push to the site. The Arctic was merciless, and even in March, temperatures plummeted to minus 50 degrees Celsius. As Carter lay in his tent, listening to the distant howling of the wind, he heard something else. Something unnatural. A deep, resonant howl echoed across the ice. Not the shrill cry of the wind, not the sharp bark of a fox. Something different. Something big. Helena, who had been outside checking instruments, entered the tent. Her face was pale, her breath coming in short gasps. "Carter, we're not alone out here." He sat up. "Polar bears?" She shook her head. "No, something else. I saw movement beyond the ridgeline." Carter frowned. "Movement?" Helena hesitated, then finally whispered, "Wolves. Big ones. And they're watching us." His blood ran cold. There were no recorded wolf packs in this section of the Arctic. The conditions were too extreme, the food supply too scarce. But if what Helena said was true, what were they doing here, and why were they circling their camp? The ice reveals its secret. The next morning, the convoy pressed forward. By midday, they arrived at the excavation site. Carter stood at the edge of the frozen ridge, looking down at the site that had haunted him since the satellite images first arrived. The submarine was there, a dark, metallic structure, partially protruding from the ice, like a frozen corpse waiting to be unearthed. But there was something else. Near the wreck, perfectly preserved paw prints, massive, unmistakable, looped around the site, the same patterns from the satellite scans. Helena crouched beside one of the prints, pressing her gloved hand against it for scale. Her voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't just any wolf pack. They've been here for a long time. Generations, maybe." Carter exhaled, his breath crystallizing in the air. Something had kept this wreck hidden for decades, and something was still guarding it. As the Arctic wind howled around them, the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They weren't the first ones here, and if the tracks were any indication, they were being watched. The Arctic was silent, save for the distant howling of the wind as it swept across the frozen wasteland. The ice, once an impenetrable tomb, was finally giving up its secret. For days, the research team had worked tirelessly, breaking through layers of ancient ice to reach what lay beneath. The U-977, the long-lost German submarine, was slowly emerging from its prison. The process was painstaking. Thermal drills carved into the ice, while heavy-duty equipment carefully cleared away the thick frost that had preserved the wreck for over 7 decades. But there was one thing that didn't change: the wolves. They had remained at a distance, never coming too close, yet never leaving. Their yellow eyes glowed against the pale Arctic backdrop, watching the excavation with an almost unnatural stillness. "They're marking their territory," Dr. Helena Brooks murmured, standing beside Dr. William Carter as she adjusted her binoculars. "But it's more than that. They're waiting." "For what?" Carter asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Helena didn't respond, because she didn't know. Revealing the past. By the 5th day, the majority of the submarine's exterior was uncovered. The team stood in a half-circle around the vessel, their breaths forming misty clouds in the freezing air. Despite decades entombed in ice, the submarine remained intact. The steel hull, though covered in frost and corrosion, had held up remarkably well. The faded markings of the Kriegsmarine, the insignia of Nazi Germany's naval fleet, were still visible along the side. "It's unbelievable," Lieutenant James Reynolds muttered, brushing off a layer of ice from the hull. "It looks like it was frozen yesterday." But the most unsettling part? There were no signs of external damage, no battle scars, no torpedo holes, no indication that the submarine had been attacked. So why had it been abandoned? And why had no one left? Carter exhaled and placed a gloved hand on the rusted metal. Let's open it up. The frozen crew. The hatch was sealed tight, requiring several men and a hydraulic press to pry it loose. When it finally gave way, a low hiss of freezing air escaped from within. The air smelled of oil, rust, and something else. Decay. Not fresh, but ancient. Carter lifted his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness of the submarine's interior. The first thing he saw were boots. And then, bodies. His breath caught in his throat. The entire crew of U-977 was still inside, frozen in time. Helena took an unsteady step forward, her eyes wide in disbelief. The crew hadn't decomposed. Their uniforms, their skin, even the expressions on their faces were eerily intact, preserved perfectly by the ice. They weren't slumped over in panic. They weren't reaching for escape. Most of them were still seated at their stations, hands resting on control panels, as if they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. Reynolds ran a hand over his face. Jesus! Carter's stomach twisted. The men had died instantly, but how? There were no signs of struggle, no bullet wounds, no distress signals sent. Whatever had happened to them, it had been sudden and silent. The last entries. Helena took a shaky breath, then moved toward the captain's quarters. A thick layer of frost covered everything, from the navigation equipment to the faded maps still pinned to the wall. Near the command desk, partially encased in ice, was a journal. Carter recognized it instantly. It was the logbook of Captain Heinrich Kaufmann, the final record of what had happened inside U-977. Carefully, Helena retrieved it, brushing away the frost. The ink was faded, but the words were still readable. Carter leaned in, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs as he read the last recorded entry. "We are no longer alone." A heavy silence fell over the team. "Something is watching us from the ice. We hear them at night, low howls that do not belong to wolves. They are hunting, but they do not attack. It is as if they are waiting for something." Carter swallowed hard. Schmidt went outside last night. He never returned. But in the morning, his footprints were still there, leading out into the snow. And next to them were tracks. Massive ones. Not a bear, not a wolf. Something else. Helena looked up sharply. Tracks. Carter continued reading. "Captain says we must keep the hatch sealed. No one leaves. No one enters. But I fear it will not matter. The ice is shifting. They are coming." He reached the final words, scrawled in uneven, desperate handwriting. "They are already here." A chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold ran down Carter's spine. Helena took a slow step back. What? What did they see? No one spoke. Outside, the wind had died down. The wolves, silent until now, suddenly began to move. Their slow, patient pacing had stopped. Now, they were facing something else, something in the distance, something that was moving. Carter inhaled sharply. What was still out there? The pages of the logbook were stiff with frost, the ink faded yet legible beneath the thin layer of ice. Dr. William Carter held the fragile document carefully, as if the weight of history itself rested in his hands. The words belonged to Captain Heinrich Kaufmann, commander of the U-977, and they told a story that no one was prepared to hear. The submarine had not been lost. It had been trapped, and something not human, had been watching them. A secret mission gone wrong. Carter turned to the first significant entry, dated October 12, 1943. "We have been given orders for a mission classified beyond top secret. The destination is the Arctic, coordinates undisclosed until arrival. The officers do not question, but I see doubt in their eyes. Even the Führer himself has taken an interest in this operation. What are we looking for out here? A classified mission." Theories about Nazi expeditions to the Arctic had long been dismissed as wartime myths, but this entry confirmed it. They had been searching for something. But what? Carter flipped the page. The next log dated October 20th, 1943. "Something is wrong. The men are restless. The radio equipment malfunctions intermittently. The compasses are unreliable, spinning wildly when we surface. The Arctic ice groans beneath us, shifting unnaturally, as if something moves below. And last night, we saw it." There was a shape on the ice. At first, we believed it to be a polar bear, but it did not move like one. It stood too still, watching. We submerged before it could come closer, but in the morning, it was still there, unchanged, standing at the exact same distance. Carter felt the familiar chill crawl up his spine, a figure standing motionless on the ice, for hours. Helena Brooks exhaled shakily. That's not normal animal behavior. Lieutenant James Reynolds, standing behind them, frowned. You think it was one of the wolves? Helena hesitated. Maybe, but... She looked out toward the Arctic wasteland, where the pack still lingered at a distance, their eyes fixed on something unseen. She shook her head. No, I think it was something else. The missing crewman. Carter continued reading. The entries grew more erratic, the handwriting more frantic. October 25th, 1943. The ice is moving. I know how that sounds, but it is true. The cracks form and seal themselves too quickly. The temperature is dropping unnaturally fast. The men are frightened. Last night, Schmidt left the submarine. He was gone only 10 minutes. When we searched for him, there was no trace. No blood, no torn fabric, no signs of a struggle. Only his footprints in the snow, and next to them, another set. Larger, heavier, not human. Silence filled the submarine as the words sank in. Reynolds clenched his jaw. They lost a man out here? Without a sound? Carter nodded grimly. And it gets worse. He turned the page. The next entry was barely readable, ink smudged by what looked like shaking hands. Nowhere to run. October 30th, 1943. We have run out of fuel. The engines are dead. The ice has swallowed us whole. We cannot leave, but I fear it would not matter if we could. The thing on the ice is still there. It is watching. Helena took a step back, running a hand through her hair. Jesus. Carter closed his eyes briefly, imagining the crew's terror, trapped in a metal tomb beneath the ice, unable to run, knowing that something, some force, was watching them, waiting. What the hell were they looking for? Reynolds muttered. Did they find it? Carter hesitated before flipping to the final entry. The date read, November 2nd, 1943. The wolves have come. They do not attack. They circle. They wait. It is as if they do not want us to leave. Or perhaps they know it is too late. We sealed the hatch. The air is running out. But I hear them now. Not the wolves. The others. We should not have come here. They are coming. What happened to them? Carter shut the logbook, his breath shallow. The last words of Captain Kaufman burned into his mind. They didn't die from starvation, Helena whispered, or the cold. Reynolds tightened his grip on his rifle. Then what the hell killed them? Carter looked back at the frozen crew, their bodies untouched by time, their faces strangely peaceful, as if they had given up before the end even came. And outside, the wolves had stopped moving. They were no longer pacing, no longer watching. They were waiting. Carter's pulse pounded in his ears. But waiting for what? The Arctic night stretched infinitely above them, the sky fractured by stars that seemed frozen in place, unblinking and eternal. The research team huddled near the entrance of U-977, its steel hull still radiating an eerie presence, despite being long devoid of life. The discovery of the logbook had changed everything. The submarine had not been lost due to battle, nor had it sunk due to a mechanical failure. Something had happened to the crew. Something so sudden, so absolute, that not a single one of them had left the ship, and the wolves knew. They had always known. Tracks in the ice. Dr. Helena Brooks was the first to notice it. She had spent the past 2 hours carefully examining the ground-penetrating radar scans, trying to make sense of an anomaly in the ice. At first glance, it seemed to be nothing, just another series of tracks, scattered over the landscape like any other wildlife movement. But the more she studied them, the more unsettling the truth became. These weren't normal. She knelt beside one of the fresh paw prints, brushing away a thin layer of snow to expose the ice beneath. They've been walking this path for years, she murmured. Lieutenant James Reynolds turned from his position near the submarine, frowning. What do you mean? Helena traced her gloved fingers over the frozen outline of the print. I mean, these aren't just recent tracks. She gestured toward the ice. This isn't the first time wolves have been here, and it's not the first time they've walked this exact route. Carter, standing nearby, folded his arms, intrigued. You think it's generational? Helena looked up at him. Not just generational, deliberate. Reynolds adjusted his grip on his rifle, suddenly uneasy. What the hell are you saying? She exhaled, brushing snow from her knees as she stood. I'm saying that these wolves have been following this path for over 75 years. Their ancestors walked this same route, generation after generation, and they never stopped. The realization settled heavily over the group. They're not just wandering, Carter murmured, the weight of the truth sinking in. They're keeping watch, Helena finished. A silent vigil. The team set up additional scanning equipment to analyze the ice layers surrounding the wreck. Carter wanted proof, not just speculation. The results were beyond anything they had expected. Radar scans revealed layers of wolf tracks, preserved beneath the ice, dating back decades. Year after year, wolves had walked the same exact path, following the same loops and patterns. It was not instinct, it was remembrance. Helena studied the data, her hands resting on the edge of the screen. They never left, she whispered. Carter felt a chill, one not caused by the Arctic cold. What are they guarding? Outside, the wolves stood motionless at a distance, their yellow eyes reflecting the dim light from the team's equipment. They were not hunting, they were waiting. The hunt that never came. It was Lieutenant Reynolds who finally voiced what everyone had been avoiding. There's no food source out here, he said. No caribou, no seals, no small game. So how the hell have they survived? No one had an answer. Arctic wolves were apex predators. They roamed vast distances in search of food, relying on prey migrations to sustain their packs. But this pack? They hadn't left. They had remained in this dead zone, surviving in a place where no life should be possible. Carter swallowed. They're not here to hunt. Helena turned to face him, her breath shallow. They're here to protect. A heavy silence fell over the team. For decades, these wolves had returned to this place, circling the wreckage of a submarine they had never boarded, watching over the frozen dead. But what were they protecting? And from what? Carter turned back toward the wreck, his pulse hammering in his chest. There was something beneath this ice, something the wolves knew, something they had spent generations guarding. And now, for the first time in 75 years, that something was no longer buried. The interior of U-977 was a frozen time capsule. Every corridor, every compartment, every piece of equipment had been preserved beneath the ice, untouched for more than 75 years. The crew had perished in place, as if death had come suddenly and silently, leaving them in an eerie state of suspended animation. Dr. William Carter had spent his career excavating lost vessels, but never had he encountered a ship that felt this wrong. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of metal, oil, and something else, something ancient. But it was the cargo hold that held the true secret. And when the research team finally pried open its sealed hatch, they realized this mission was never just about the war. A hidden cargo. The cargo hold was smaller than expected, cluttered with rusted supply crates, old equipment, and rations long frozen into useless bricks. Nothing out of the ordinary, until they saw the crate. It was different from the others, larger, reinforced with thick steel bindings, and secured with a lock mechanism that didn't match the technology of the 1940s. There were no records of such a crate being on board, no mention in military archives, no signs in the ship's manifest. This wasn't standard cargo. Carter stepped forward, running a gloved hand over its surface. Faded, yet still visible beneath the frost, were symbols, etched deeply into the metal, and they were not German. Helena Brooks, standing beside him, inhaled sharply. These aren't military markings. Carter frowned. Then what are they? She stepped closer, brushing ice away from the top of the crate. More symbols appeared, revealing a repeating pattern that made the hair on the back of Carter's neck rise. They're not from this era, she whispered. Reynolds glanced between them. You're saying this isn't Nazi tech? Helena exhaled, shaking her head. No, I'm saying it's not from any known civilization. a link to the forgotten past. Carter motioned for the team to document the crate before opening it. Scanners were brought in, measuring its structure. The metal was not of standard composition, its alloy resembling something both ancient and otherworldly. The symbols were the most puzzling part. Helena took out a digital archive device, scanning the patterns against every known historical language. The results took less than a minute, and what they found was impossible. The symbols matched carvings found in prehistoric ruins, discovered deep in the Arctic over a century ago, remnants of a civilization that should not have existed in this region. "This doesn't make sense," Helena muttered. "These markings, they predate written history." Reynolds stared at her. "Are you saying the Nazis found something ancient out here?" Carter's jaw tightened. "Not just found it." His gaze darkened as he looked at the crate. "They took it." Opening the crate. The moment they cracked open the crate, the temperature in the submarine seemed to drop, as if something beyond the cold itself had been disturbed. Inside was a box, crafted from a smooth black stone that looked almost organic. It was lined with metallic edges, yet it bore no hinges, no seams. It should have been nothing more than an artifact, a relic. But the air inside the cargo hold felt wrong, heavier, charged with an energy none of them could explain. Helena reached out, running her fingers over its surface. "It's warm," she whispered. Reynolds stiffened. "Warm? How?" Carter knelt beside the crate, studying the faint pulsating glow within the carvings on the box. "I think," he hesitated, "I think it's still active. A mission beyond the war." The weight of the discovery sank into them. This was not a military operation. U-977 was never meant to be just a warship. The Nazi High Command had been searching for something buried beneath the Arctic, something that predated modern civilization, something they weren't supposed to find. And they had taken it. But if the crate was retrieved, why had the crew never returned? Why had the wolves never left this site? Carter turned to Helena. "If this artifact is what they were transporting, then the real question is—" His voice trailed off as the wolves, standing outside the submarine, suddenly lifted their heads in unison. Their eyes locked onto something beyond the ridge, something moving beneath the ice. Carter swallowed hard. Did they unleash something that was never meant to be found? The Arctic had reclaimed its secret. After months of excavation, research, and analysis, the U-977 was sealed once more beneath the ice. It had been unearthed, its mysteries glimpsed, but some things were never meant to be disturbed. Dr. William Carter stood at the edge of the frozen excavation site, the wind howling around him. The last of the research team had begun their retreat, leaving behind only a monument, a solemn marker to those who had perished here, both the men who sailed into the unknown and the silent watchers who had guarded their fate for generations. The wolves still lingered, pacing at a distance. Their yellow eyes reflected the pale Arctic light, their bodies blending into the snow as if they had always been part of this frozen wasteland. Because in a way, they were. And Carter finally understood. Sealing the past. The U.S. military and research teams had spent weeks analyzing the artifact, the black stone box, the markings, the unnatural energy that still pulsed beneath its surface. But in the end, there were no answers. Only warnings. The Nazi mission had been reckless. They had taken something ancient, something that did not belong in their hands, and it had cost them everything. When the last scan of the submarine was completed, Carter had made the final call. Leave it. The submarine was lowered back into its icy tomb, carefully preserved beneath layers of reinforced ice, ensuring that it would remain undisturbed, just as it had for the past 75 years. Some things were not meant to be uncovered. The monument. At the center of the frozen site, a simple black stone slab was erected. It bore an inscription in both German and English, a tribute not only to the men who had vanished into history, but to those who had kept watch over them. In memory of those lost aboard U-977, 1943, and in honor of the unseen guardians, the wolves of the North, the sentinels who never forget. The stone stood alone in the vast whiteness, an unmarked grave for a chapter of history that had nearly been erased. Helena Brooks traced her fingers over the carved letters, her breath visible in the cold air. "Do you think they understand?" Carter turned to look at the wolves. still standing at the ridge, still watching. "I think they've always understood," he said. Reynolds, standing nearby, shook his head. "You really think they've been protecting it all this time? Protecting us from it?" Carter exhaled slowly. "I don't know. Maybe they're just following something older than instinct. Maybe they're doing what they've always done." He looked out over the endless expanse of snow, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe they're keeping the balance. The wolves will always return." As the last of the team departed, Carter lingered for a moment longer, his gaze following the silent procession of wolves as they moved across the ice. They walked the same path that they had always walked, leaving the same footprints in the snow. He thought about the generations before them, about the wolves that had stood watch since the night the submarine vanished. Would they still be here in another 75 years? Would they still keep their vigil when no one else remembered? The wind howled through the Arctic silence, carrying with it a sense of something eternal. Carter tightened his coat against the cold, watching as the last wolf turned to look at him, a final, knowing glance before vanishing into the endless white. The mystery of U-977 was buried once more, but the wolves would never leave, and some secrets would never be told.